Is it possible for a soccer team to exist if it hasn't kicked a ball yet? Is it possible for a club to exist if it only has fans, but not a name, but not a jersey? We're going to discuss that today with our guest on the Because Football podcast, Noah Toumert. He is the head of the foundation for Cleveland Pro Soccer. We're going to talk about what that means, how that is different from the club itself, but still an important part of creating connections, creating a vision for what soccer can do in the community. And as someone who has been very embedded in using this beautiful game as a tool to bring joy, to empower people, to give opportunities and access. So we're going to talk about a lot of that today, and really excited to do so. Noah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Andrew. Really excited to be on.
I want to give some context. We're going to get into Cleveland Pro Soccer, and that's what you guys are called right now. We know you're going to be an MLS Next Pro and WPSL clubs, yet no official name, no badge, all of that. But we're going to get into some of your operations and what you're doing, the programs you guys are running to still be present in the community and build the club before it kicks a ball. But personally, tell us how you got into the game. What are those early memories? What are the things that kind of got you hooked?
Yeah, I mean, soccer's been a part of my life since before I have any memories. I always like to joke that my dad put a ball in the crib before I could even walk. So I think soccer's been a part of my life since day one. My dad's from Algeria, North Africa. So, soccer is always just part of the bloodstream and part of what me and my family live and breathe with. So, I don't have like a first memory of falling in love with the game. I think it's been a long, long love story that I've just been so happy to be a part of. But soccer has been the main sport that I've played in my life, the main way that I built community in my life, the main way to kind of experience challenges, failures, successes, everything that goes along with the sport in general. So soccer's kind of always been there for me since day one.
When did you realize the social potential of the game instead of just playing? I know you had played at a really good level. We all love to watch the highest levels of the game. But was there a particular moment or an influence that was like, hey, we can use this game for a lot more than just developing the next great player?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I always had a curiosity, especially with that international background, about why the U.S. underperforms on the men's side, at least on the global scale of the game. When we have so many resources, you hear the statistics about how we have more players than they have in Germany, and why have we never really had that success? So I got really academic about it after my playing career ended, and I started doing I ended up with a second degree in college in history with a focus on U.S. sports history. Just because I was kind of trying to understand the structural pieces of it. I think it was always an interest of mine to say, what have we maybe failed at doing in this country that other countries have done better? And it wasn't until I moved back to Cleveland about 7 years ago. And I started working with a local nonprofit that at the time was called the Refugee Response, now Resource Cleveland. That was a refugee support service organization. You just meet so many families who love the game that live here in Cleveland, but have completely fallen through the cracks of what our system allows and the type of people who play. I'm not saying anything crazy. We've all heard it before about how soccer especially is a suburban rich kid sport, and how we over-index towards people that have the ability to pay to play rather than, just making it accessible in the way that I think we all want the world's game to be. So I got lucky enough when I was working there to get connected with a woman who was working at another organization, a church down the street from us. Her name's Becky Trout. Shout out to Becky. She is the reason why I'm in this space right now. And she was just opening up space at the church to let young refugee kids in the community do whatever they wanted. So they were holding their own practices and just going and playing every day. And I got connected with her because she was, putting these trying to find leagues to put these teams in, didn't really understand the system. She wasn't a soccer person. And I kind of came in my free time and said, this is something that is an immediate need and something that I'm equipped to do. I never wanted to work in soccer. It was never my goal to be in this space or to work with a pro team. And after about, 6 months, a year of working with her on that, I finally convinced my boss over at Refugee Response that there were some real legs here and we could turn this into a program. We, now run, I think, the largest refugee sports organization in the city. They still do. And you could tell immediately from going from, a bunch of kids who are just love the game and are going to a yard on their street to having an organized team with games and practices and the accountability that comes with that. how beneficial it is for kids. I think we all talk about like the health outcomes, the social emotional outcomes, but there's
Hmm.
just a a huge importance that anyone who's played organized competitive sports knows about what it does for you as an individual and what it can do for
Hmm.
communities. So I think just from that experience and seeing that, and now, that was 5, 6 years ago. Now I've gone with those kids into young adulthood and seen firsthand the positive transformation that it can make in kids' lives. And it's like a no-brainer to me. I think when people talk about a lot of the social issues that we have in this country, I'm like, youth sports are the answer, and accessible youth sports
Hmm.
seems to be the answer. Soccer is my bag because that's the sport that I love, and I think that it does a great job at connecting people to global culture. But youth sports, getting kids out and playing in safe, accessible spaces, I mean, that's the recipe in my mind.
I want to go a little bit to what you had mentioned with your academic pursuits of studying
Sure.
sport in the United States versus other places. From what you've seen, what is it on a structural level
Mm.
that has made sports, youth sports, now we've got all these PE firms and there's crazy money in it. And we all know with soccer, all around different sports, the complexes spring up and all of those things to host tournaments. And every time you go to the airport, you're going to see some travel soccer kids in the airport flying somewhere. Was it structural
Mm.
or more of just like a philosophical value that you've seen when you compare a
Mm.
United States with a Germany or other developed countries when it comes to how they operate youth sports and how they see it?
Yeah, like it's a great question, and unfortunately, I don't think there's a silver bullet answer for it. I think it's one of those things where, unfortunately, the answer isn't that sexy because it's like it's a lot of different things, especially when you're in the online soccer space. And I've been one of these guys before that are like, well, it's promotion relegation in the United States. That's the difference. And sure, maybe that would help and maybe that would change, but it's a chicken and egg situation of, are we ready for it? Could it bankrupt a business that, for the first time ever now has existed for decades in a healthy. So I think that there's a lot of things. I think a piece to it is that America's a much younger country than the rest of the world, obviously. Like these are our countries, Germany, England, Brazil. These are areas where sporting clubs have existed as an integral part of city and municipal civic infrastructure and life for
Hmm.
hundreds of plus years. So it's not as easy as just saying, we're going to start a team in Cleveland and we're going to drop that down and be comparable to the the system that they have in Sao Paulo or something like that. And part of it
Hmm.
is because fundamentally the way that our relationship as Americans is with professional sports is different than how it is around the country or around the world.
Totally,
People
totally
look at these
different.
clubs as these community centers where the clubs do more than just having one sport that they play. I mean, you even look at like FC Barcelona, who has one of the better basketball teams in Europe. You would never have
Hmm.
the
Yeah,
Cleveland Browns running a soccer team that's, the Cleveland Browns MLS team. That's just not how our sporting system operates. So while I do think like there are these things like promotion relegation, solidarity payments, and training compensation, I could talk about that forever. I think that's a much bigger one than promotion relegation. And when you talk about structural need, there's also just the cultural relationship we have with sport that is fundamentally different here in the United States than it is
hmm,
in most places around the world. And one thing that stuck out to me a lot is infrastructure. And when you go around the world, anyone who's traveled, like I've traveled a lot, and there's not a single city I've been to where there aren't soccer fields and mini pitches all over the place when you're in a major city. We don't have that here in the United States. And actually, a big thing that I've been doing a lot of research on the last 6 months is the history of how basketball became the most popular sport in the United States. And how post World War II, there was like this
hmm.
ubiquitous push to create basketball infrastructure in every city
Interesting.
around the world. As there's rec centers being built, schools being built, all of them have basketball courts, whether it's indoor or outdoor. The reason being that people wanted to give kids and communities something to do. They wanted to give them places to go after school so they weren't getting in trouble. And it's kind of that if you build it, they will come mentality of if that was soccer fields, if at that time we'd chosen
Yeah.
soccer fields, soccer would be the most popular sport being played by kids here, 70 years ago. And we probably have a very different system, both in terms of access and competitive nature.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one whenever we talk about infrastructure because in a way there's no country that can compare the infrastructure in the United States when it comes to sports. The access question, you know?
Exactly.
And I think it varies a lot depending on the place, but there is that layer of municipal fields, right? Government owned, those type of things. But then, are there enough of those? Now we see all these big developments that are more privately held and are catered more to the more elite sports. So there's not those spaces, just the cost of, the rentals for space now is a huge thing. Whenever people kind of like pay to play, rightly so, is a big boogeyman. But I think a lot of people oversimplify it. And comes back to that structural question of like a lot of stuff just costs money.
Yeah.
In the United States more than it does in other places, like fields, like upkeep, all of those things that are not necessarily, again, it depends on the case, but not necessarily subsidized or supported by the government investment and things. So
For sure.
yeah, it's not a clean answer, but it is insightful to me that I hear you talking about both that mix of structural, but then also a cultural piece, because they obviously like influence each other.
Can I
When
say
you
one
look
more
at
thing on that?
Yeah,
Just
for sure.
because the way you said that, it sparked something in me, which I mentioned solidarity payments and training compensation, which just, if anyone watching doesn't know, basically at its high level, this is that if a player develops at your club as a youth player, as they get sold on in their professional life, which is, 1 in a million, you get a percent fee of that transfer fee that goes back to each club that they've played and developed at. That to me is one of the starkest differences in how the United States operates from the rest of the world. I think we're like one of maybe 3 countries in the world that don't acknowledge that and don't
Yeah,
abide by that.
yeah,
Not because it's just I don't think it's just because our federation doesn't want to. It's because it's not how sports and sports development happens in this country. So it's like outside of the nexus of American labor law. And there's a really interesting case about DeAndre Yedlin and when he went to Tottenham and they called Akron University where he had played and said, like, where do we send this payment? And they were like, we have no idea what you're talking about. It's a really interesting story and lawsuit that came out of that. But I think it reveals something about our youth sports system, because you're 100% right, Andrew, that it's not as simple as just saying people are greedy and that's why they pay. That's why it costs so much for youth sports. It costs so much for youth sports to facilitate youth sports because the model exists. Payment incentive is to get parents to pay more money to subsidize the fields, the travel, the wages of everyone. That's our profit incentive, is how much are parents willing to pay? How much can the market bear? We don't have a system here where the incentive is development. So when you look at the rest of the world, the incentive for clubs is to scout and ID kids who are outside of the system and develop them into future pros. We don't have that here. So it's partially why everything costs so much, because we're not able to subsidize kids playing by, the successful ones in the club. But it's also a big reason why, in my opinion, we don't really develop elite talent here. It's that merit-based approach that I think we all love to think we have in the United States of what are we incentivizing our businesses to do? Right now, we're incentivizing coaches and clubs to sell the dream of going to college instead of incentivizing coaches and clubs to develop potential professional players. I think that's like a really important thing that people miss when they talk about this pay-to-play development or pay-to-play issue, is that like our entire sporting, remove soccer away from it completely. Our entire sporting system is not built around elite player development. It's just not.
Yeah, whenever that topic of solidarity payments comes up, nobody really knows like what. I think that was probably a more clear example you gave me there, because it hasn't been something we've looked at. It's been so like college geared in many cases, and that's the
Yep.
pathway. Now that has changed with NIL.
Yes.
Very much so. What impact it will have on soccer remains to be seen. I think for basketball and football, it's pretty clear. But as far as like the ripple effect is going to be interesting to see. Let's pivot, because we could chat forever about those things, and we will. We will continue to do so, I'm sure, until we see changes that we both kind of like to see. And again, it's all those conversations; they all kind of get circular and all mixed up. But I think there's enough people like yourself doing great things that are at least trying to literally create alternative vision, right? Alternative opportunities. Let's talk specifically, because you've taken that experience from working and setting up the programs with the refugee organizations in Cleveland. Now director of the foundation for Cleveland Pro Soccer, give us a little intro about the club, which we don't have a lot. There's not a lot of like firm, realistic facts right now, but tell us about it. And I think particularly why, given that there's still no badge, there's still no name, we're still a season or two away from kicking a ball, why for your leadership group it was so important to lead with the foundation before even some of these other pieces like signing a player or a coach.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely kind of the backwards model from everyone that I've talked to around the league, around the country, around the world. Everyone's like, well, usually teams start playing before they worry about the foundation. And we're definitely the exception to the rule. We have brands and everything coming out soon, a couple months. They're all sorted on the back end, and we're just putting our release process together right now. So,
Cool.
things are moving,
Cool.
and we've got a great stadium site here in Cleveland. We're hoping to start playing in 2027, but see, it depends how long the stadium takes, I think. So things are still progressing pretty well there. There's the powers that be might hold things up, but that I think was a part of the idea was we don't have to wait to have a professional team and start selling season tickets to be a part of this and to be a real entity and an institution that's doing good in the area. That doesn't have to just be the checking the box on the back end when we're saying like, yeah, look, we're a good club. We care about the community. We're going to do workforce development. It's like this can be a structural part of who we are as an organization. Part of that is because our founders and our leadership, specifically Michael Murphy and Gina Kelly, have had this very like Cleveland centric, Cleveland support approach. Michael Murphy, one of the founders, him and his partners who were the first visionaries behind it, Michael and Nolan, are not soccer guys. They're Cleveland guys, but they're not soccer guys. And they had built a business out in LA, film distribution business, brought it back to Cleveland, sold the business, and we're kind of looking around like, what positive thing can we do for the city that we love? And I think soccer has kind of always been the sore thumb here because, we're the last top 20 market in the country that doesn't have professional soccer. We have a huge soccer history where we over index in terms of like players per capita and success on the state, regional, and national scale. And we're a city primarily based of immigrants. So even now we have these really strong immigrant communities that run their own tournaments, their own teams, watch parties, you name it. So the desire for there to be soccer and the amount of soccer being played here is huge. So I think that they just kind of stumbled upon it because, especially Michael has young daughters who are playing soccer now. And he's like, what about this? There's this huge glaring problem or need. What if we move into that space? And I met him pretty quickly after the decision to join MLS Next Pro. He came out to one of the massive international adult pickup events that I was holding, and he just was like blown away by the fact that this was happening in a corner of Cleveland. We had 50 plus people out speaking dozens of languages, and there was no real story being told. There was no real like larger scale impact. And he and I just hit it off immediately, and I could tell that he wasn't just another pro sports owner. He wasn't just coming and saying, we need to do something that's cool in the city because there's a market opportunity and we see that we can create valuation and get out of this soon. It was, I love this city. I'm trying to figure out what to do next in my life, and I need to figure out how to create the biggest impact. And he and I kind of got in a lab and figured out like, what does this actually look like? What does being more intentional about support and creating accessible systems here in our city, what would that look like in an ideal scenario? And I think to me there's two pieces of it, and it's kind of what the impact of it that I wanted is, and then what the purpose of it is with the club. Because especially when you talk to other MLS foundations, the purpose is kind of all over the place. It varies from being like, we're doing our owners' pet projects for what they think that, nonprofit work should do, to we're creating accessible systems. I kind of sold it internally as that if we want, on our first home opener, our first year that we're selling season tickets to sell out. If we wanted a strong fan base, especially in a city like Cleveland where relationships are so important, people have low trust about people coming in from out of town or people they don't know coming in and just like throwing money at something. We need to endear ourselves to the community. And the best way to do that is to show up for the community, to build things for this community and not ask for anything in return. So my sale internally on this was, this is the highest, philanthropy is the highest ROI marketing that we can do. If we build accessible systems and continue to show up and create experiences nobody has had, show up in the places that have been ignored, that's how we're going to get headlines about us. That's how we're going to show people that we actually give a shit about this city and what's going on, and that we're not just asking for a transaction where you're never going to hear from us until we need to sell you a ticket to a game. And that's kind of been like the grounding philosophy. And then I've, Trojan horsed in my own like academic pieces of it and my experience to say, what does this actually look like? How can we create the highest impact in this space? But we have this united front that is like, we want to do good for the city, not just because it's going to benefit us, but because good begets good. And the better that the Cleveland soccer community is, the more connected it is. That's a better ecosystem for a pro team to exist within. And then having a pro team that's healthy and well supported is a better ecosystem to raise a soccer player in. Like, I think that these are, when you look at the city and the team, it needs to be a relationship where they're embedded with each other, not siloed. And I think that that's one of, back to that initial conversation we were having about the structure and the culture. It's like, you need to be intentional about bridging those gaps from the beginning and doing the work and showing up, or otherwise you're just going to end up saying like, please come support us. You should be a fan of us because we're the only show in town. That's not fun. That's not how you get like lifelong fans.
It's so fascinating to me as I'm hearing you say that, and as I've been going to a lot of different cities around the country and talking to people with this documentary series we're doing, right? Going to all the World Cup host cities. Like the distinction between being a soccer city and like an MLS or an MLS Next Pro city or a USL city, like there's actually a huge gap in many places.
Yes.
A place saying it's a soccer city does not mean at all that will naturally and organically translate to supporting a pro team, right? We can think of a lot of examples. I'm thinking right now, the one that keeps coming to mind is like Miami. It's like unbelievable love for the game. So fragmented. I had a conversation with somebody in LA the other day. Same thing. Like so much love for the game, so fragmented, right? Obviously, those are huge cities. In a way, with the Cleveland, although you guys are still a top 20 market, you can't really afford to like alienate, whether it's the youth games and all these things. It's really amazing looking at American soccer, how, to use your words, siloed it can be.
Yeah. And Cleveland is, I think we're not unique in this. Like when you look at the youth sports landscape, youth soccer landscape, it is so fragmented. It's political. People hate each other. Like feuds that have been going on for generations. It's crazy. And because we're such an immigrant city, sometimes that's people bringing it over from like Eastern Europe and these large conflicts. But I think the underlying reason is the other thing we were talking about. It's like, this is people's livelihoods. This is how people live, is running these clubs. So when another club pops up, or if you're taking, players come over from a club, it's not just like, oh, maybe they have a better development system. It's you're eating my lunch. It is, you're going for my bottom line, which impacts how I support my family. Like, you understand why there is this like tension and like aggressiveness around territory. Our goal was always to not get in the fray of that, and instead it's a great phrase Michael uses, our founder Michael Murphy. He always says, like, we want to be the North Star of soccer in Cleveland. And that's really our mentality, is can we use the event of bringing pro teams here to be a more organizing and collaborative leader, rather than saying, hey, we're going to come in and start this team and we're going to pick one existing youth club, choose that as our baby, and just piss everybody off. Because it's not the way that it's not the way that you build fans, but it's not the way that you build a sustainable ecosystem for these things to exist in. And ultimately, while of course we want fans to show up, and that's an important part of it, like I won't sugarcoat that in, getting people to love the club and become lifelong fans, because it's important to us and us to survive. Like, that is a really important part of it. But I think the more important part when we talk about it internally is, kids who are playing the game shouldn't have to worry about this stuff. Like, even growing up, 20 plus years ago playing here, you could tell the tension, and that certain teams hated each other because their owners hated each other. It's the stupidest thing in the world. It has nothing to do with the kids. It has nothing, and it only takes away from their enjoyment and then their lifelong relationship with the game. We need to make it easy and we need to make it fun. And to me, it's like, can we stand at the top of this community, create kind of a standard for everybody working together, and then fill out the bottom with access and create opportunities for those kids to then go into this incredible infrastructure of clubs that exists here.
Yeah, that piece about the feuds and the conflicts, I always like to say about youth soccer, I've been a coach and been involved a lot at different levels of the game. It's actually a quote that's often, I think, was originally about academia, but it's essentially along the lines of like this: the stakes are so high precisely because it actually matters so little.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like this very paradoxical thing that always comes to mind.
Yeah.
For me. Yeah, it's really interesting with you guys saying that, because essentially, obviously, there's an element of having fans in the stadium, having great corporate partnerships to represent the city so that the club can continue on. But then as far as that, the youth, the local ecosystem, you guys want to, you can almost sort of create this parallel piece that maybe sets an example, or we'll kind of see how that develops for you guys. But I know that part of that, of supporting the soccer community, is not just events, right? And programs, as valuable as they are, but you guys have a really ambitious project for actually building these mini pitches, going back to your statement about, the post-war boom of basketball courts and that infrastructure. And we're talking about that is very much linked hand in hand with access. So I think you guys have already built 3 mini pitches through the foundation. You've got a couple more in the pipeline working on that, but tell us about that. And that's also something that, those are big investments, I imagine. I'm sure you have to have really important private and public partnerships. But that's also a bit atypical, I would say, for club foundations to be able to doing that so early on in the journey, right? That typically comes a little later, or, the Philly area, we're seeing that a lot of collaborations with the World Cup Committee and the Eastern Pennsylvania Soccer, all these things. But tell us about why creating those mini pitches and that network has been a focus so early on for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think I look at that now and I think like we got lucky that we had partners who also see the same vision and wanted to help lead that charge. So, the first one was done between the Pro Team Foundation and my old employer that I talked about, Resource Cleveland, at their office, which was at a school called Urban Community School. And that campus really took the idea, ran with it. And then the other ones was that we're lucky enough that a good friend of our organization and great pro, one of the best players to ever come out of Cleveland, Justin Morrow, is a great friend of ours. And he started an organization called MLS Black Players for Change. And he had identified that he wanted to bring through MLS Black Players for Change 2 mini pitches to Cleveland. So, we really came in and said, we'll help coordinate, but we'll help support and put this in our larger vision, which at the time, as we had stated, was to bring 10 mini pitches to Cleveland. It's not easy. And I want to talk about that and kind of what this process is, because I have a lot of thoughts on that. But to talk about the larger idea, like I said, we wanted to bring 10 mini pitches. We got the 3 done. They're especially the one at Urban Community School has been up for about 2 years now, and they use it every day that they can. Not right now because it's snowing and horrible and icy outside, but like a good Cleveland winter. But it is crazy. It's such a community center, as it should be. That's exactly the goal. And our goal here with the next 7 of them is working in partnership with our local transit system, the RTA, to emulate what they've done down in Atlanta with the station soccer model, where the MARTA and a local soccer nonprofit have built. I think they built 6 turf fields alongside.
Shout out
MARTA
Soccer in the Streets. Soccer in the Streets, Sensation Soccer in Atlanta. I've had them on the podcast, so if anybody wants to hear more about that, we talked with Catalina Dunn, who's marketing for them, and we also interviewed them for our Atlanta documentary. But yeah, unreal project. The common sense of putting fields right next to transit stations, so you're creating literal access and you're creating more visibility around it. And so that's pretty ambitious, though, because just talking to them, I know, speaking of the partnerships, and you got to have that land available. How does that get how do you handle the ownership or the management of that actual building and financing of the field itself, then who's administering and managing. I'm sure that partnership puzzle is is quite, what has it been? I'm curious because in Cleveland, you guys haven't had the pro soccer imprint, but you have the Browns, you have the Cavs, you've got is it Guardians now? You guys are the Guardians,
Yep.
right? Yep. And I'm maybe missing some other pieces there, but like, it's not like some stories we're seeing now in American soccer where a pro team comes in and there's like really a vacuum of pro sports to an extent, or just like farm teams and minor leagues. So I imagine you guys are coming into like a relatively competitive space when it comes to like corporate partnerships and funding and things like that. So what has that been like, of saying like, hey, we're a soccer team, we're just Cleveland Pro Soccer, like that's our name, trust us. What's that been to go around and start some of these discussions and relationships, and like for people listening who might want to replicate it in their own communities, what does that take to get it done?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely easier said than done. And I think we are lucky because Cleveland, not only like, I wish I had the study off the top of my head, but some study about like the amount of money spent on pro sports per capita around the country. And like Cleveland's always one of the highest. Like I think it's kind of like a meme, but especially when people talk about the Browns and how crazy it is that people still support the Browns. But Cleveland, I think, and I've lived around the country, I've gone to a lot of places around the country, a lot of sporting events. Like I think we are the best sports city in the country, just because I used this phrase earlier, but like we over index to be in conversations we shouldn't be in constantly, in terms of both performance on the field for every team but the Browns, and the way that our fans show up. Like it's just wild. We have great attendance. People love supporting this city. And I think that's a big part of it, is there's so much pride and love here in the city of Cleveland for like anything that's unabashedly Cleveland. People want to support it. We have this kind of like down on our luck, hard knocks view, I think, from the rest of the country, but that's not how people view it here. There's this really, really strong sense of pride. So it's never been a worry about like, is there enough market to have another pro sports team here? The other pro sports teams here are very, very supportive of us. They're great partners. And, I think that because we have such a strong immigrant, refugee, and just soccer playing community here, we knew that there was a need. Like we are, the last top 20 market in the country that doesn't have a pro soccer team. And I think that to us, that's always been like, as take me out of the Cleveland soccer group, but just as a soccer person who grew up in Cleveland, we've always been like, why the hell don't we have a team? And there's reasons,
like,
and it's back to that political
sense.
stuff. And, there's a long history of it, which I won't bore the viewers with now. But I think that then translates to like corporate partnership as well. I mean, Cleveland, another thing about Cleveland is we have a lot of major companies that are headquartered here. And now we're starting to see more and more large companies moving to Cleveland as it becomes, I think, a more affordable place to do business. But these companies which support the other pro teams continue to be very interested in supporting new opportunities, because I think it is just like we have a really strong community and people want to be a part of it. They know that there are parts of our Cleveland population that don't engage with the pro sports teams at all, that will engage with the pro soccer team. So, it's kind of like, who wants to be the belle of the ball? I think that's kind of part of it too. It's a game that the pro soccer in Cleveland is something that everyone's been asking for since the Wolsteins tried to do it like 20, 30 years ago. So I think there's always been this like, who's going to finally get it across the line, and we're the group that's going to do that. So it's never been hard to find partners, or there's never really been a lot of pushback from other pro teams or institutions, or even on the club side. Like I mentioned, I think when we talk to people are like, how can we support? How can we get our fans? How can we get our families there? Because everyone just realizes it's good. It's good for the city. And Cleveland is going through such a strong revival. It has over the last decade, and the developments happening here, especially along our waterfront and in the downtown sector, are huge. So we're kind of just like a large part of what the future of Cleveland looks like. And I think everyone's standing behind that.
Yeah. The last piece I want to dig into, you had mentioned it, and I really love it, and we're definitely going to be pushing it as, kind of the hook for some of our, when we repurpose this conversation right across LinkedIn and stuff, is something you and I had talked about initially. The way it was in my head was like, when we look at creating programs, events, spaces to open access, to democratize the game. Basically, where the complex question of funding comes is not solely or like in the majority a burden upon the user, right? Because we know that's pricing a lot of people out. But there's so many opportunities, I think, for businesses, for brands, that if they do really cool, meaningful projects that support soccer communities. The phrase in my head was doing good is good business. I think what you said was philanthropy is the best ROI we can have. I just want to kind of use that as our final anchor point to the conversation, because it's one of those things that comes in my head, and you and I are drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit. So it's a little bit tough where it's like, do we have the horse blinders on here? If it was that obvious, why weren't there more people doing it? And as we mentioned, MLSs have their foundations. A lot of USL clubs rely on community, so they're doing programs. But still, in general, I think we look around a lot of times, the relationships between pro sports franchises in general of all the sports and the youth game and things is still largely still pretty much in that pay to play realm, right? Like there's, from what I see, if anything, the fact that we are rejoicing now that MLS academies exist and they are paying for fees for their players, and we're seeing more players getting developed because they don't have to pay, right? And then obviously, handfuls of other more elite clubs that might offer scholarships to players. But can we just kind of tie a bow in this whole conversation with that concept in general? Because I just feel it's so powerful.
Yeah, no, I think that that's kind of become the grounding concept and philosophy for the work that I'm doing. And I think what we're doing here in Cleveland is to try to take that out of our heads and turn it into proof of concept in a way that I think we have some really strong statistics around now after this past summer and some events that we ran. But it's something I've always really believed. And I think that this is, yes, I think you're right that you and I are both people who've drank the Kool-Aid on this, but honestly, I think that it is we're ahead of the curve. I think that this is the future of marketing actually across the board in a lot of ways. And I think that as our economy turns to being an entertainment and experience-based economy more and more, the things that are going to drive the needle is creating these experiences, creating entertainment, and creating meaningful ways to connect with people. I think that traditional marketing, and that's really what my background was before I moved back to Cleveland and started this soccer program and going down this journey, was marketing and advertising. And there is a safety, I think, for companies to say, I know I'm going to do pay-per-click advertising and I know pretty much what the ROI on that's going to be. It is a safe bet. It is more of a science than an art. And I think this sell right here is lean into the art because the potential is so much higher. I think that there's more risk that goes along with that for sure, because if you put on an event and an event flops, then the ROI isn't huge. But I'll just give an example from us this summer that kind of has solidified it and I think helped propel us into saying, yeah, we're going to continue to invest in this type of stuff, is that we held a street soccer tournament in Cleveland. Well, we held a couple of them, but the first one, we had been running street soccer pickup at the North Coast Yard, which is a pop-up play center right next to the Browns Stadium, which the Browns are moving out of the city. So the city of Cleveland is starting to figure out, what do we do? Let's start activating this space. We got brought in as a partner and did weekly adult street soccer pickup. It got huge. We had hundreds and hundreds of people showing up every week. So people started asking, you should do a tournament. So me, crazy, no budget, said, all right, I'll throw one. And we've got a Monday night. We'll bring in, the best amateur adult teams in the city, the Akron FC, who play in USL, the Cleveland Crunch, play in MASL, and bring everyone together and get these soccer brands and, get a bar going, get music, make a fun event. We did it on I think it was a little over $1,500 for the entire event. And just in terms of, we had over 500 fans come. We had a few hundred players. It ended up being an awesome, incredible night. And just from the impressions alone on our social media account and the other posts that we did from news headlines that we got from other Event Cleveland accounts that covered it, we got over $1 million worth of ad or of marketing dollars just from that organic from those organic impressions. So we developed this kind of system after looking at that and saying like, holy shit, you can do so much more with so much less money. Yes, there's risk to it. So the next event that we did about 2 weeks or a month later was a women's version of it. It happened to be the same week that kids went back to school. So we got less attendance. We only had about 350 fans show up, but same number of players. And we probably did about half that in impressions. But
Hmm.
still, that is much better than we would have gotten for that money. And of course, there's going to be some ebb and flow that goes with it. So, but to us, it was we created something that hadn't existed before, brought
Yeah.
together communities that otherwise would not be playing with each other, created an event that had massive, massive impact on the cultural side of it and the kind of untangible, untrackables. And then when we looked at the statistics, said, oh my God, this is something that now we have this proof of concept to go to a sponsor for next year and say, hey, we want to put a field down here, or we want to put on another one of these events. Here's what the impressions were from last year. If you give us $1,000 and we can do X, Y, and Z with this event, we can guarantee about guarantee that same number of impressions, but your logo will be plastered over everything. So
Hmm.
yeah, you need to build
Hmm.
the proof of concept on it. But I think that this idea that doing good in your community, doing good for your community is a much better return than just saying, all right, we're going to sit in our house and do the easy way of doing pay-per-click advertising and hoping we get in front of someone who's going to convert on a ticket sale.
Yeah, I love that example that you give. And as you mentioned, you guys tried it a second time. It didn't quite work out the same, but there's so much energy and promise in it, that really shows that you take a couple of those pieces and you keep experimenting and it's going to click and to do that organically, I think it's a no-brainer too that, for brands and then people as consumers, like, seeing someone associated with that type of event and supporting it and being able to get those, have that come on your algorithm if you're in the Cleveland area or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was, how it wound up in front of you. You just kind of value and respect that a whole lot more than seeing the simple, like, sponsor piece
Yeah.
and sponsor posts and that type of element.
And I think from like a club perspective, because after those events, especially after those events, I had a lot of different organizations around the country reaching out to kind of ask about it. I think that this type of stuff from those events to the more programmatic pieces is very replicable. But I also think that there's just like people undervalue how important brand association is. So if there's a big company in your community that's looking for like good PR or just has similar values, even if you can't guarantee a certain number of impressions or a certain number of conversions based on an event or some type of collaborative, program or sponsorship you're looking at, the brand association with an organization who is just doing really good stuff and having great impacts on people's lives is incredibly valuable. And I think we need to, in this space, be a little more confident in walking into those rooms and saying, like, we're doing something really good. If you don't want to be a part of what we're doing, then that's fine. There's other people who do, because there are so many people, I think, in each community that just want to use their dollars to support goodness in their community. It's back to that thing I think we've been talking about this whole time, which is like good begets good. And you need someone to kickstart the cycle of we'll do good and then we'll receive a support for that so that we can do more good and then it benefits everyone. And that's kind of what we took on this summer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an awesome model and one that, I'm sure there's some other people doing it around the country, but the way
Sure.
you
Yeah.
guys are able to do it, especially, before you really like, I'm just thinking of what's really going to happen once there's a badge, there's a jersey behind and put next to that. When you combine it with games or, a trophy, hopefully at some point early on in your guys'
Yeah.
journey, right? In the run too.
Well, I was just going to say that's part of the sale on two internally. If there's anyone else out there who's like a Noah who's listening to this and you're saying, how do I convince my organization to do it? Is that we've had so many people from this past summer's event asking us, when are we going to do the next one? When are we going to do the next one? So when we're looking at stuff like a brand launch or how do we get out brand merchandise after it's launched, we already now have a community and a consumer base who are asking for us to do a place-based event that we can guarantee that will not only have a relationship where they're used to us, but will have their attention. So if you're saying, how do we convert jersey sales once we put our first jersey out or the first run of merchandise? okay, well, hold a tournament and we ask, and we not only, give every player something that has our logo on it, but then we have a set of merchandise that we then sell to folks. How do you capture that interest? That interest is
Hmm.
hard. The attention of people is harder and harder to get. So doing
Yeah.
something really cool and endearing them to you is I think the strongest way to turn someone into just like a consumer into a lifelong fan. And, if there's anyone else out there who's doing this types of tournaments or these types of events or has this mindset, please reach out to me because it feels like there aren't many of us. And I think we should all be talking about it because there's a real pathway here.
Definitely. We need kind of like a little mastermind group of
For
everybody. So if
sure.
you
Yeah.
are listening and watching, we're gonna, we've got all the links in the description and ways to get in touch with Noah. We'll share all that information too, but make sure you do. And we're interested in doing more. And I think again, before we move on to our all-time five-a-side segment, which I'm excited
Oh, yeah.
to hear yours, Noah. Again, I think just like in conclusion, it's good to do good things just because they are good. But I think the larger conversation of what we're talking about here is that those things do have ROI you can see on the spreadsheet. It just requires that vision and that patience. And it allows you to like, especially in your guys' case, it allows you to lead with that real like authenticity and really giving and serving first. We talked to recently on the podcast as well, Greg Lawless of Short Corner Media.
Yeah.
We had him as a guest. One thing he was saying was like, you have to create a community and audience with the stories you're telling. In your guys' case, you're literally inviting them into the story and to be a part of it. You have to do all that before you can ask for the sale, right? Before you can
Yes.
ask for money. You can't put
100%.
the cart before the horse in this case.
Yeah.
So I think just to reiterate, like, I don't want to veer too much, or people be like, oh, this is just, some feel good. Like, there's a place for that. That was the nonprofit you were working with. That's that model. That's, different types of governmental funding. There's a place for that. We want to do that too. But like in the case for clubs and for businesses, like it's part of that financial makeup as well, which I think is important to reinforce.
Yeah, my like big piece of advice to people in this space, even not just in the soccer space, is like don't get too fixated on using nonprofit language when you're in this space, because I think nonprofits and foundations have a tendency to really focus on the like impact and selling people
Yeah.
on this idea of like, give us money, support us
Mm-hmm.
because we're doing good in the community. People know that, and there are a million out there who are doing that. Talk like you're a business and talk like they're don't be afraid to take a course to understand how to plot ROI on stuff like this so that you can talk in terms of the dollars of where this actually goes to benefit them. Even when you're talking to family foundations, people want to know not just the impact, but that's the easy part to talk about. But how do you actually then say, this is sustainable. This is what our sustainable plan looks like. Here's what the return for corporate sponsors is. Like, learn the language of the for-profit world, especially if you've been in the nonprofit world forever, because that is the differentiating factor a lot of times.
Very well put. Shall we move here? Shall we
Yeah,
get
let's
to our
do it.
all-time five-a-side now? So
Yes.
again, remind you and our audience, whether you're listening or watching, it is our guest. So it's Noah plus 4 legends because he's got to play somewhere. So you got to tell us where you're playing in that team. Keeper is a philosophical choice. Many people, the real ones, go without, right? And live dangerously and add attack, but really your choice. But I'm excited to hear who we're getting here on your all-time five-a-side squad.
Yeah, I also went without a goalkeeper because I like to live on the edge. And I played striker my whole life, so I think that attack is, I'd rather outscore my opponent than go to a 1-0, like a boring 1-0
Especially
game.
five-a-side.
Especially
in
five-a-side. I was
five-a-side.
going to say that the best five-a-side and futsal teams I played on are pretty much comprised of all attackers who are willing to work back on defense. So I got a team that, I don't know how far we'd go, but these are the guys I'd want to play with. So first, Lionel Messi. I mean, I think the GOAT, and I'm not afraid to say that. I would, you got to put him on the team. He's going to score you a half dozen goals at least. And especially putting him next to Thierry Henry, who's probably my all-time favorite player.
Okay.
And
Nice.
really the reason I'm a huge Arsenal fan. He's sold me on Arsenal from when I was a young kid. So this is three attackers,
Let's
one
go.
midfielder, and one defender. My other probably second favorite player of all time, Zinedine Zidane. Got
Love
Zidane
it.
in the middle, and he's just going to be the maestro. He's going to pull the strings. And then sweeping up everything at the back, we're going to have Maldini. And he's going to crack someone, and he's going to be fancy on the ball. And I think people are going to be so afraid to try to attack against him that they're just not. So I think that's my team, my five-a-side team, and I think we're going to win it all.
They're just not. Yeah, talking about the best defense is absolutely terrorizing them. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's a fun squad. That's a really fun team to put together. And you guys are definitely gonna rack up the goals
that's
and
the
be
that.
very classy and graceful doing it. So yeah, love that. Love that team, man. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Last one to finish up. In conclusion, we are on the Because Football podcast. So I would love for you to complete the sentence, because football, dot, dot.
I love that you end the podcast this way. Like I've listened to a lot of other people's experience and explanation finishing of this sentence, and I've thought a lot about this. It's a hard one. But to me, I think it's just that because football is the tool to understand the world. That is how it's always been to me. It's always been the viewpoint into understanding a lot of how the world works. And it is the global language, man. If you love football, you can go to anywhere in the world and make friends and have incredible experiences. And I think in a country and a world that feels more and more divided and fractured than ever, like these spaces that you can exist in and you can feel connected to the people around you, that's what it's all about. It's fun to hate people on the field, and then as soon as you get off the field, you're friends again. And that's like the
Yeah.
power of sport in general. So to me, it's because football, because it's the way that you understand the world.
Yeah. Love the answer, man. Love that. And
Yeah.
love that you're prepared, because typically we try to spring this on our guests, but I guess this is a sign, you've done your
Yeah.
research. We're,
I
we're getting around here. So it's a pleasure, man.
I think I would have had the same answer either way, hopefully. But I remember the first time I told you I'd listened to the podcast a few times, and I'd always been like, man, it's a great question. It's a great question. So it's always percolated around up top.
Awesome, Noah. Man, this was a great conversation. I'm definitely excited to have a round two at some point,
Yeah, for
get
sure.
another conversation. I'd love to, couple months out here, see what other people with similar mindset and similar wavelength, other examples of projects like this around the country. I just think there's, even if it's not exactly the same as what we've talked about, what you're offering, I just feel like there's so much potential for people who just want to build the game and get involved in their own backyard. And whether it's the number of adult amateur leagues now that we have, whether it is examples like what you guys are setting of how to be able to financially support and make happen these really amazing projects and opportunities with the World Cup coming, all of that all mixed together. I just think it's a really, really exciting time. And I think that I just want to be a part of helping to encourage, empower people to do it and continue to learn from people like yourself that are, hands-on, getting stuck in and really being a part of it, man. So thanks so much for sharing your insight, and we hope to connect again soon.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Appreciate you having me on. And like I said, to anyone else who's out there who's interested, please hit me up. Always happy to talk about it. And once we got everything running on the stadium and we got our home opener scheduled, we got to have you up here, Andrew. We can have a good time.
I always judge the quality of the conversations and the gravitational pull of an idea of a club by how much I want to immediately book a flight to go to that place after talking to somebody, and you guys are up there, right? And it's especially powerful when it's, let's call it, underdog places like Cleveland,
Yeah.
And again, like you said it, for your Because Football is a tool to understand the world. I think that's what I to do with, whether it's with this podcast or really our longer form storytelling as well. There's just no end of ways that this game, kind of comes up and manifests in amazing ways. So it's been a great ride, and we want to keep it going.
Yeah, love it, man. Well, hope to see you soon. We'll talk soon, man.
Definitely. Everybody listening and watching, thank you all for being here. Pick up the torch, get stuck into your own community, take some of Noah's ideas, get talking with people, make it happen. We've got all the links in the description with how you can get in touch with him and follow what Cleveland Pro Soccer is up to. And leave a comment. Let us know what you're thinking. Is this a little bit pie in the skies or head in the clouds, or are you feeling moved by our conversation today? But thank you all for being here, and we will see you on the next episode. Peace.